In the winter of 1798, Hollow Creek Farm sat 2 miles east of the Red River, tucked between stretches of knotted oak and limestone cliffs that seemed to lean in, listening. The land had been passed down without pride. No one bragged about owning it, only that it stayed in the family. Crops grew faster there, but twisted. Corn stalks curved mid-growth. Tomatoes turned purple before ripening. Even the animals born on the farm carried something off. Lambs with two tongues, calves with slanted eyes that never blinked. The farmhouse itself leaned back like it wanted to fall into the hillside, its whitewash long since faded to bone. No one remembered who built it. No one could explain why the cellar door was reinforced with iron. The McKinley family had lived there the longest: Thomas, his wife Edna, and their 3 sons, born one bitter January night when the wind wouldn't stop knocking. People claimed they heard the boys before they saw them. 3 cries in perfect sync, then silence that rolled over the hill like a sheet pulled tight. Neighbors didn't visit often. The dirt road curved away from the property like it wanted nothing to do with the place. The few who came up the drive would leave with headaches, or the sense they'd forgotten something they'd never learned. Even the mapmakers drew Hollow Creek wrong. The house always shifted, either too far east or not there at all. But the soil, it grew. Fast, thick, wild. Strawberries in November, peas that flowered in frost. It gave too much, and none of it tasted right. Once, a man from town planted a row of apple trees just outside the McKinley fence line. They bore fruit in 2 months, then cracked open from the inside. The man sold his land the next week, moved west, wouldn't say why. Some whispered the farm was sacred. Others said it had been cursed since before the Shawnee left the hills. A hunter claimed he found carved stones deep in the woods behind the house. Not English, not native, not anything he could place. He never went back. No one quite understood Hollow Creek, but everyone agreed on one thing: the McKinley boys were not like other children. And whatever grew in that soil didn't stop at the roots. It reached up into the house, into their blood, into whatever it was they would become. The births happened on a Thursday, just after midnight, when the fog outside lay so thick it made the windows weep. Edna McKinley's screams could be heard down the hollow, raw and rhythmic, like something being torn loose. Thomas had ridden into town 3 days earlier, bringing back the only 3 midwives who'd answer a knock after sundown. They didn't speak to each other on the way, just held their shawls tight and watched the tree line. The McKinley house was dim and too warm, the air wet with something metallic. Each woman was called in one by one. Each entered the room. Each delivered a child, and each swore afterward there was only one. Mary Ellen, the oldest of the 3, said the child she caught came out in total silence. No crying, no breath. Then its eyes opened, not blue, not brown, something else. She turned away to call for Thomas. When she turned back, the baby was gone, and Edna was still straining, still pushing. The second, Ruth, insisted the child she delivered was already looking at her before its shoulders cleared. Its mouth never closed. It whispered something not in English, not in sound, but something she felt in her chest. It made her stagger. When she tried to swaddle it, her hands wouldn't move. She said it felt like time cracked in the corners. The youngest, Alva, could barely speak afterward. Her fingers bled. She said the baby bit her not in malice, just instinct. She showed the marks to no one, but Thomas later burned her gloves in the hearth without asking. In the end, all 3 boys were wrapped and set beside one another in a cradle that hadn't been there the night before. Thomas claimed it belonged to his grandfather, but the wood was fresh, and the carvings didn't match any craft sold in town. When the women stepped out, they looked at each other, really looked for the first time that night, and each one paled. Each had seen a different face, different size, different cry. One refused to take the coin offered. Another walked the 12 miles back to her cabin alone. The last one tried to speak at church that Sunday, but her mouth locked mid-sentence. The town talked, of course. Twins were rare, triplets rarer. But 3 midwives seeing only 1 child each, that was something else, something wrong. Edna never spoke of the labor. Thomas never asked. The boys grew fast, grew strange. And behind their eyes, something familiar flickered, as if each one knew what the others had seen and what still hadn't been born. At first, the names were simple, even biblical: Elijah, Solomon, Abram. proud, clean names carved into the church registry by Reverend Hobb himself. He remembered the ink blotting slightly when he wrote Abram, said the quill snapped in half between his fingers right after. But he'd laughed it off. These things happened until they kept happening. By spring, the names began to shift. On the school ledger, Elijah was written as Elian. On the grain registry, Solomon was Solam. Abram became Abrith in the old land deeds. The Reverend blamed the boy's father, saying perhaps Thomas McKinley had poor penmanship. But Thomas hadn't touched a quill in months, and the documents were in different hands, different places, and yet the changes mirrored each other, never all at once, just slowly. The school teacher, Miss Wren, was the first to notice. She'd call Elijah's name during roll, and all three boys would look up, not in confusion, in unison, as if responding was a shared duty. She tested them once, saying, Solomon, while looking at Abram. He blinked, then smiled, correcting her softly. That's not what I am today. One afternoon, she flipped through the attendance book and found the same line filled out 3 times, but the names were different. None were the originals. Elion, Sayalom, Abereth, written in her own handwriting, though she had no memory of writing them. The Reverend rewrote their baptism certificates in June, worried someone had tampered with the originals. When he returned the next morning, they were already different. A curl added to an L. A missing vowel replaced with something older, something not quite Latin. Town Hall tried to fix it. The clerk, an old veteran with no patience for nonsense, rewrote every entry himself, each boy's name etched carefully in black ink. The next week, all 3 pages were blank. Just the dates remained. When he tore them out in frustration, they bled through to the next month's entries, ink in the shape of crosses. Edna stopped calling the boys by name altogether. She said it made her dizzy, said she could feel something slip inside her teeth when she spoke them aloud. Thomas told her not to say them at all. Strangers passing through asked odd questions. One man from Missouri said the names matched figures from old Welsh folklore. A woman heading west said she'd seen the same trio in a dream long ago, but with mouths on the back of their necks. By harvest, the town no longer said their names aloud. They referred to them as the McKinley boys, or simply those 3. But it didn't matter, because whenever someone did whisper their names, the real ones, the old ones, the air would still, and the boys would turn to look, all at once. At first, it was a party trick, something the boys showed to cousins during the harvest festival, or dared each other to demonstrate in the barn at night. You'd line them up in front of a silver-backed mirror, the kind passed down from the English side of the family, the kind too old to lie, and you'd see the room behind them, the wall, the oil lamp, the straw on the floor. But not them, not their faces. Their clothes might blur in the glass, but their skin wouldn't return. No eyes, no mouths, no breath misting up the surface. It was like trying to see smoke in the shape of a boy. Only water showed them. When they stood at the edge of Hollow Creek, their faces shimmered back like anyone else's, though slower, like the reflection had to think before mimicking them. If they moved too fast, the water didn't follow. It lagged, like it remembered a different version of their bodies. Mrs. Brenning, who lived on the next farm over, noticed it first, said she watched the 3 playing near her well and felt something off, not in her eyes, in her bones. When she looked at the brass kettle hanging on the porch, their shapes weren't there. They didn't cast light back, she muttered, later. Just soaked it in. She never invited them over again. Other neighbors tried to explain it. Some blamed bad polish. Others said the old mirrors were warped, or that candlelight played tricks. But it wasn't just one mirror. It was every silvered one. The doctor's shaving glass, the postmaster's hallway looking glass, even a broken shard hanging in the tailor's window. The boys passed by and left nothing behind. People started watching more carefully. In town, if a child ran ahead and vanished from the mirror beside a storefront, folks would freeze. And when it happened with the McKinley boys, no one spoke, they just turned away. Mr. Holloway tried to prove it was superstition. He brought a mirror to Sunday service, set it on the pulpit, and invited each child up to wave. One by one, they did. Giggles echoed in the rafters. But when the 3 boys stepped up, the church went quiet. The mirror showed the pews, the altar cloth, even the stained glass window. But not them. Mr. Holloway smashed it on the floor. After that, even Edna stopped hanging mirrors in the house. She turned them all to the walls, said she didn't want to tempt the devil by asking what he looked like today. Thomas buried the last one behind the barn, because they all knew the truth even if no one dared to say it. The mirrors weren't broken. The boys were. It was meant to be a gesture of welcome. The boys had grown tall now, quiet, always together, and Pastor Whitcomb thought it time they found their place among the congregation. He walked the miles to Hollow Creek himself, hat in hand, and asked Thomas and Edna if the boys might attend Sunday service. They agreed, though not eagerly. "They won't sing," Edna warned. "They never do." "That's quite all right," the pastor said, forcing a smile. "The Lord hears even the silent." That morning, the church pews filled with worn bonnets and stiff collars. Children whispered and were hushed. The McKinley boys arrived just before the bell, dressed alike in dark wool coats that didn't quite fit, shoes that seemed untouched by the mud outside. They sat in the last pew, no hymn books, no chatter, just their pale hands folded neatly in their laps. By the second hymn, something changed. The air felt thicker, like walking into a room where someone had been crying. The organist missed a note. The candles, all 12, flickered once, then went black, as if snuffed by breath no one felt. The windows, though closed, began to rattle, and Pastor Whitcomb, midway through a prayer about light, stumbled, his voice caught in his throat. He looked up toward the pulpit's crucifix and dropped his Bible. He gasped, eyes wide, face gone gray. Then he collapsed. Gasps rippled through the church. Mrs. Delancey screamed. One of the deacons rushed forward. The rest stayed seated, frozen. Not even the wind dared stir the silence that followed. The boys didn't move. When the doctor arrived, sweating and out of breath, he checked the pastor's pulse and declared it unsettled but present. Pastor Whitcomb came 2 minutes later, muttering about heat and dizziness, but witnesses said the room was cold, bone cold, and no one had lit the candles again. As the congregation emptied out, people glanced at the back pew where the boys had sat. Empty. No one saw them leave. That night, a vote was held in hushed tones at the town hall. Some called for the boys to be kept away, not harmed, just kept away. Others insisted it was coincidence. Bad nerves, unseasonal drafts, but no one invited them back. The next Sunday, the candles burned fine. The organ played steady. The air was light again, and the pastor, pale but upright, preached about trials of the spirit. He never looked toward the back pew, and neither did anyone else. It was late in the afternoon when Abram climbed the ladder to the hayloft. The other two were in the fields, and Edna had gone to town for soap and flour. No one saw the fall, but everyone heard it. A crack of wood, a boy's gasp, and then silence, the kind that feels like it's watching you. Thomas found him minutes later. Abram was lying at the base of the ladder, a rusted scythe beneath him. It had been tucked into the straw weeks ago. Forgotten, the blade had cut deep from hip to rib, clean and brutal, flesh open like a book, but Abram was calm, breathing, blinking, no screams. Thomas carried him inside, trailing blood that soaked through his shirt and darkened the floorboards. He sent Elijah sprinting for the doctor, who arrived just as the last light faded behind the hills. Dr. Howard had been a physician for over 20 winters. He'd seen plague and childbirth, broken spines and gangrene, but nothing prepared him for what he found in the parlor. Abram was awake, pale, yes, but sitting upright, clutching a wet rag to his side. The wound was still open when the doctor knelt beside him, red and raw and pulsing. "I need whiskey, thread, and a steady hand," Howard muttered, reaching for his bag. But by the time he pulled his needle free, the bleeding had slowed, and then stopped. Before their eyes, the edges of the wound puckered inward. The skin, still red and torn, began to ripple, not like healing, but like something remembering where it was supposed to be. The gash closed. No stitches, no scar, nothing left but a thin line that looked days old. Maybe more. The doctor stared. "I need air," he said, standing too fast. He left the bag on the floor. He didn't come back. 3 days later, his practice was shuttered. A note nailed to the door said only, "Some injuries aren't meant to be understood." Rumors circled like crows. Some said Abram had made a pact. Others claimed he'd never truly been hurt, that it was trickery, hysteria, shadows playing on straw. But the blood was real. The rag was soaked. The floorboards still held a stain no scrubbing could lift. And Abram, he went back to the loft the next week. He smiled more after that, not in a kind way. It began with the schoolhouse roll call. Mrs. Elkins was no fool. She was strict, punctual, and kept meticulous notes. Her roster never changed. 3 brothers, Elijah, Solomon, and Abram, always seated in the back, always quiet, always watching. She had written their names dozens of times, carved them into her desk ledger with firm, exacting strokes. But one Monday morning, only 2 boys came in, and nothing seemed strange. She glanced toward the back of the room and nodded at the familiar faces, Elijah's sharp stare, Solomon's slower blink. No empty desk, no question. Just 2. That night, she sat at her kitchen table grading papers. When she flipped to the attendance sheet, a chill ran down her spine. The page was worn, smudged. One name had been erased, not scratched out, not crossed. Erased so cleanly that the paper underneath looked untouched, as if no hand had ever written there at all. She blinked hard and tried to recall the third name, a name that danced just out of reach. She saw a face, pale, with eyes like dull glass, but no sound, no syllables. She closed the ledger. The same thing happened at the general store. Mr. Daly swore he remembered those 2 odd boys coming in for nails and flour. When his wife asked, "What about the third?" he looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "You mean their cousin?" he said. But the cousin had died last spring in a barn fire. Everyone knew that. In church, the preacher paused mid-sermon and stared at the pews. He whispered, "Weren't there more of them?" before shaking his head and continuing the hymn. Even in their own home, the strangeness deepened. Elijah was quieter. Solomon spoke less. And when a neighbor visited for supper, she noticed 3 spoons on the table, but only 2 plates. She didn't mention it. But later, as she walked home, she realized she couldn't recall the conversation, only that something had been listening. At night, Mrs. Elkins began to dream of a child with no name, standing outside the schoolhouse, tapping on the window, smiling without lips. She awoke with a scream lodged in her throat and no memory of why. By week's end, the town had adjusted. There were only ever 2 boys. Everyone agreed, except for the mirror in the schoolhouse, the one that still showed 3 shadows when no one was looking. The storm came without warning. Sharp wind cracked branches and peeled siding from homes like old bark. By morning, Hollow Creek was scattered with debris shingles, barrels, one collapsed henhouse. But it was the shed behind the Mercer property that drew the town's attention. It wasn't theirs, exactly. The Mercers had only recently bought the land adjacent to the Hollow Creek farm after the mother passed, and the boys those remaining kept to themselves. The shed sat just on the edge of the tree line, hunched and half swallowed by vines. No one had seen it used in years. Most forgot it even existed, until the storm cracked it open. When Mr. Mercer went to assess the damage, he found the door blown clean off its hinges. The wood inside was soaked, the dirt floor slick. But what caught his eye weren't the tools or the shelves lined with rusted jars. It was the paper. Hundreds of pages, some curled, some flat, tacked to the walls with careful symmetry. Each sheet held a drawing or something close to one. Twisting lines, circles that bled into sharp teeth, figures with too many fingers, or eyes that weren't in the right place. And around them, a language, not letters, not runes, but something inked with precision, like it was copied rather than created. Mr. Mercer backed out slowly and said nothing. That night, he told his wife only, "That shed isn't ours to fix." Word spread fast, curiosity faster. By the next evening, 6 townsfolk gathered at the edge of the trees, whispering. A young man named Eli Jennings went in first, with a lantern and a cigarette. He came out pale, shaking, and silent. They asked what he saw. He said, "They weren't drawings, they were instructions." He wouldn't explain. Days later, the shed was boarded up again. This time with nails so deep and so many, it looked more like a sealed coffin than a structure. Some say Elijah was seen near the shed that night, just standing, watching. Others said they saw 3 shadows behind the trees, but no one followed, not anymore. And by the next season, The shed had vanished. Vines took it. Soil swallowed it. Only one page was ever kept, a scrap that blew loose and landed in the Mercer barn. It showed a spiral that curled into itself endlessly, with words around it no scholar could translate. But the cows refused to go near that barn again. And sometimes, when the wind was low, you could hear the pages fluttering, like wings. The Frenchman arrived near dusk, a stranger in a place that didn't welcome many. His boots were too clean, his eyes too alert, and his satchel too heavy for someone claiming to just pass through. But he spoke gently, with a soft accent and an old-world politeness that made even the sheriff let him stay the night. He asked for a room and got one above the tavern. He asked about the Hollow Creek boys and was told not to ask, but he already had. Said he'd heard of them 2 towns over. Said strange things reached Europe too in letters never meant to travel that far. Before sleep, he asked to visit the old Hollow Creek property. No one offered to take him, so he walked alone. By lantern light, he made it there and back before midnight. At breakfast, he didn't come down. By lunch, the innkeeper knocked. No answer. The door was unlocked. Inside, the bed was untouched, the window open, and the man gone. All he left was the journal, a thick, leather-bound book left open on the desk. Most of the pages were filled with sketches, anatomical drawings of unusual proportions, diagrams of mirrored organs, symbols stitched into veins. There were notes in French, Latin, and something even the schoolteacher couldn't place. But the last page was in English. Scrawled in a rough hand, ink smeared as if written in haste. It read, "They are not brothers. They are one thing, 3 times. I watch them breathe together. Their eyes flicker at different times. I think they remember things out of order. This is not birth. It is return. Do not let them touch the ground at once." Beneath the writing was a symbol, the same spiral that had been found in the shed behind the Mercer farm. By sundown, no one could find the Frenchman's tracks. No one saw a horse leave. No one sold him supplies. It was as if he had been airlifted from the earth itself. That week, 3 cows were found dead near the old Hollow Creek boundary. No wounds, no blood, just gone, hollowed. The journal was locked away in the schoolhouse desk, but some say pages went missing over the years, one by one, until only the spiral remained. Locals stopped calling them brothers after that. They started calling them it. It started with the chickens 6 gone in a night. No feathers, no prints, no struggle, just absence. The henhouse stood intact, doors still latched, but the straw was cold and damp, as if something heavy had settled there and breathed. Then it was the goats, then a mule. Mr. Claiborne, who lived 2 hills west of Hollow Creek, said he found his cow tipped on its side with its eyes open and milk curdled in the udder. No signs of a predator, no blood, no decay. Just drained. Like the soul had been ladled out and the body left to harden. The town vet came and went, muttering about molds and parasites, though he'd never seen anything like it. He left before nightfall and didn't return. Around the same time, the crops on the Donovan side of the hill began twisting in on themselves. Corn stalks curled like fingers, beans coiled into tight knots around their own roots, and near the fence line, the one that had always leaned too far inward, the soil went soft and black. One child claimed to see circles forming in the barley overnight. Not trampled, not flattened, just spoiled. In perfect spirals, every grain within the curve turned brittle. Nothing inside grew again. That fall, families who farmed within 2 miles of the Hollow Creek place started planting late and harvesting early. One man burned his fields entirely, saying it was better to lose the land than let it breathe like that. At church, whispers grew. The pastor gave a sermon about Cain and cursed soil, about what happens when a sin's roots go too deep and bloom underfoot. He didn't name the boys, but he didn't have to. Mrs. Henley, who once taught the twins their letters, told a neighbor she'd seen one of them, maybe Solomon, standing in the middle of a dead field at dawn. Just standing, not moving. The crows circled overhead but wouldn't land. Somewhere in the woods behind Hollow Creek, a scarecrow appeared. No one claimed it. No one built it. But it stood facing the house, not the field. Its head was made of something waxy and pale. Its arms were tied behind its back. The town sent a letter to Frankfurt asking for agricultural aid. No one responded. The first to vanish was Maisie Boone. She'd been the youngest of the three midwives, barely 20, soft-spoken, and known for her thick red braid and gentle hands. One morning in spring, her front door swung open and her hearth was cold. A loaf of bread, half kneaded, sat beneath a damp cloth on the counter. Her boots were missing, nothing else. Her mother wept for weeks, begging the sheriff to track the girl's trail, but it ended 5 paces from the garden. No horse prints, no signs of struggle, just a single patch of turned earth where the grass refused to grow again. The second was Eleanor Hatch, a widow with a face like a weathered apple and a Bible under every pillow. She lived closest to Hollow Creek and refused to speak of the night those boys were born. When asked, she'd simply say, "There was light where it shouldn't be." She disappeared in July, on the hottest day of the year. Her rocking chair creaked all morning, empty. By dusk, it had stopped. The neighbors thought it was the wind until they stepped inside and found her house exactly as it always was, except for the mirror above her fireplace, which had shattered inward. No blood, no note. Her cat was dead in the cellar, every bone in its body turned the wrong way. The third, Agnes Morrow, made it furthest. She packed her wagon with her 2 sons and fled east toward Lexington. She stopped speaking halfway through the journey. Wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep. By the time they reached the third town over, she simply stepped out of the wagon at dusk, walked into a cornfield, and didn't come back. The boys searched all night. They found her bonnet snagged on a dry stalk, and, 30 feet further in, her shawl folded neatly, resting atop an open hole in the dirt that hadn't been there the day before. No one went in after her. The hole was filled in by dawn. A quiet rumor began to form in town, that the three midwives had never returned home whole, that something had passed through them on that cold winter night in 1798, that perhaps they hadn't delivered the boys at all, only opened a way. And then there was the old man, the tanner, who swore he saw the three of them walking in the woods months later, long after their disappearances, walking together, barefoot, faces calm and blank, heading toward Hollow Creek. No one believed him, but no one went looking either. Dr. Harold Finch was not a superstitious man. He had studied in Boston, apprenticed in London, and returned to Kentucky with a satchel full of tools and a head full of reason. He did not flinch at blood, nor blink at birth. But what he heard that day in the Hollow Creek farmhouse sent him into silence for the rest of his career. Elijah sat on the kitchen stool, shirt off, shoulders sharp as fence posts. He looked healthy, too healthy. At 15, the boy had the weight of a man, but not the eyes of one. His gaze moved slow, thoughtful, as if everything around him were slightly behind. Dr. Finch pressed the cold end of his stethoscope to the boy's chest. The first beat came steady, strong, and familiar. Then came a second, half a breath behind. Then a third, softer. Then a fourth lower, and not in the chest at all. Finch pulled back. "Again," he muttered, fingers trembling as he repositioned. He held his breath and listened. The beats returned. 4, layered like a hymn sung out of time. 1 near the heart, 1 near the stomach, 1 near the neck, and one that felt as though it came from beneath the floorboards. He stood, pale. "Is there something beneath this room?" he asked. Elijah said nothing, just tilted his head, the way a dog might when it hears something a man can't. Finch left his bag behind, walked out the door, didn't charge a fee. He didn't even make it back to town. He stopped a mile down the road, vomited into the ditch, and sat in the grass for hours, rocking, whispering. It wasn't an echo. It wasn't inside him. It was under him. Later, when asked why he abandoned his practice, Finch refused to say. He burned his own medical books, donated his tools to the church, and left behind a single note pinned to his clinic door. Some rhythms aren't meant for listening. Years later, his apprentice would mention one odd detail. Dr. Finch's stethoscope, the one he left behind at the farmhouse, was found weeks later hanging from the well behind the house. The brass mouthpiece bent inward, as if it had been listening to something that bit back. He arrived just before dusk, wearing the seal of the United States on his shoulder and a pistol at his hip. The man gave no first name, only that he was from the Department of Internal Affairs. said he was looking into unusual census discrepancies and borderline genetic anomalies in Hollow Creek. The sheriff, used to nosy taxmen and wandering preachers, watched him ride toward the Hollow Creek farm with more curiosity than concern. He stayed for 3 nights. On the first, a neighbor said they saw him standing at the tree line behind the Donovan property, unmoving, watching the upstairs window. On the second, smoke rose from the farmhouse chimney well past midnight. No one in town could recall seeing the boys that day. On the third night, there was thunder with no storm, a low sound, like something heavy being dragged through wet soil. By morning, the sheriff rode out to check on things. The house looked untouched, curtains drawn, no wagon tracks leading out, just silence and the faint smell of iron in the air. The sheriff called out. No answer. He circled the property. On the northern oak, 20 paces from the barn, something glinted in the bark. It was the man's federal badge, nailed clean through the center, blood dried around the edges. Beneath it, scrawled into the wood. He shouldn't have asked about the fourth one. No sign of the man. No horse, no gear, just the badge. The sheriff didn't file a report. He didn't tell the town council. He rode back quiet and locked his office for the day. That night, he wrote a letter to his cousin in Paducah, asking if there were openings in their mill. A week later, he left town with no farewell. Later, when a drifter took shelter in the same woods, he claimed to have found a tree stump with deep claw marks around its base and something buried inside a boot, polished and black, with federal-issue leather stitching. Inside was a note, folded tightly, with one sentence. I counted 3, but I heard 4. Whatever the man came looking for, it wasn't on any ledger, and whatever found him never left the farm. They weren't supposed to be there. 3 boys from town, no older than 10, had dared each other to cross Hollow Creek under moonlight. One brought a lantern, another brought a rusted pocket knife, the third brought nothing but his name, which he whispered like a prayer as they crept toward the Donovan barn. Behind it, tangled in roots and old grass, they found the edge of iron, a buried hinge. They dug with their hands, then with the knife, until they uncovered a wooden trapdoor sealed with rotting rope. It opened with a breath, no creak, no sound like it had been waiting. Inside, a ladder led down into a square room carved from red clay. The walls were smooth, the air smelled faintly of lavender, and something metallic beneath it. The lantern flickered as they stepped inside. That's when they saw them rows of chairs, child-sized, arranged in perfect formation, 13 in total, each hand-carved, each still warm, as if someone had just stood up. On the dirt floor, symbols were scratched, circles within circles, stitched with lines that pulsed slightly in the lamplight. In the far corner, a low humming came from something under a tarp. One boy stepped forward to pull it off, but the lantern hissed and died. In the pitch black, none of them breathed. A voice, soft as dust, whispered from somewhere low to the ground, "Sit." The boys scrambled. They didn't scream, they couldn't. The air had weight now, pressing down on their chests. One reached the ladder first and clawed up, nails breaking. The others followed. When they burst from the trapdoor, the cold night air felt like fire. They didn't look back. They ran until their lungs failed them. The sheriff found the trapdoor 3 days later after one of the boys spoke in his sleep, muttering something about the lesson circle and the boy without eyes. By then, the ladder was gone. The trapdoor sealed over with clay, as if it had never been opened. They dug, but found only roots. Still, in the dirt, near where the hinges once were, the sheriff found a splinter of pine. Carved into it was a single name, Elihu. No one in town had that name. No one in town ever would. By the spring of 1816, something had shifted. Clerks at the Callaway County Archive arrived one morning to find their ledgers rearranged. Not stolen, not vandalized, simply changed. Names that once stretched over pages were missing, and entire family histories had been shortened or rewritten. Most striking was the complete absence of the McKinleys. The family, once registered as landowners on Hollow Creek Farm, had vanished from birth ledgers, deed claims, tax filings, even church rosters. Where Elijah, Solomon, and Abram had once been listed as pupils in the town schoolhouse, the lines now sat blank, not erased, just never written. Deputy Thomas Dorr was the first to speak up. He remembered helping a census taker tally the McKinley boys 2 summers prior. He'd even remarked how strange it was that they didn't answer questions, just stared. But when he returned to his copy of the census book, the section for Hollow Creek had been torn clean, as if by hand, carefully. Some blamed the fire. Months earlier, a blaze had consumed a back room of the county building, but there were no signs of burning near the archives. Others blamed a clerk, a young woman who reportedly quit the week before, without notice. Her desk drawer was found open. Inside, 13 McKinley entries, each blacked out with red ink and marked with the same word, scribbled violently again and again. Incorrect. The town pastor tried to give a sermon on the matter that Sunday, referencing the vanity of man's records. Halfway through, he stopped, claimed he forgot what he'd written, looked pale. He never preached again. Then the whispering started. People said it was best not to ask. One woman claimed she once nursed the boys as infants and then stopped mid-sentence, blinking, unable to recall their faces. Teachers misplaced drawings. Neighbors hesitated mid-gossip. Even the sheriff, when asked about the boys, rubbed his jaw and muttered something about a farm that was never quite filed properly. When the judge came down from Frankfurt to investigate, he requested all documents concerning the McKinleys. The clerk handed him a single envelope. It was empty. That same week, the town's new map was printed. Hollow Creek was still there, the bend in the Red River, the fence line, the barn, but the farmhouse was gone. In its place, a patch of green ink labeled vacant. It remained that way for over 200 years. Until 2025, when a historian researching lost settlements asked a simple question during a town meeting: who were the McKinleys? No one answered. But in the back row, a boy no one recognized raised his hand. His eyes were different colors. He didn't smile. He just said, "They're not gone. They're waiting." The fire came without warning. By dawn, the sky over Hollow Creek was bruised with smoke, curling upward in thick, dark knots that twisted against the wind. Farmers from neighboring plots saw it first, a red-orange glow behind the trees, too large to be lanterns, too still to be lightning. But no one moved to help. Not at first. They said the air smelled strange, not like firewood or livestock. It was sweet, like lavender left too long in the sun, with something metallic beneath it. Copper, they thought. Or blood. By the time anyone reached the McKinley property, the house was gone. Not collapsed, not crumbling. Gone, flattened into a black smear across the earth. Only the well remained, and a stone porch that faced nothing. There were no bodies, no bones, just a melted bell, half submerged in the soot. A stable boy named Micah, from the next farm over, swore he'd seen something. He'd wandered out during the night for water, and from the edge of the creek, caught a glimpse of figures, 3 of them standing inside the fire. Not running, not screaming, just standing. He told his father they didn't look scared. He told the preacher they were holding hands. Later that week, a group from town came to bury what they assumed were ashes. They brought shovels and hymn books, but the earth was too hard. The topsoil had fused into something like glass, slick and dark and smooth as a mirror. They placed 3 white crosses at the edge anyway. By summer, the wild grass had returned, but nothing else grew. Birds didn't land. Cattle avoided the bend in the fence. Travelers claimed the road there twisted unexpectedly, like it didn't want to be followed. One man, a mapmaker from Lexington, tried to redraw the land. He stayed 3 days in a tent near the well. On the 4th morning, he left before sunrise. Locals found his journal still open, the pages covered in sketches of the farmhouse, drawn again and again with subtle changes. One showed windows shaped like eyes, another with no door at all. He wrote a single sentence beneath the last one: "I don't think it burned down. I think it left." After that, the county deemed the land cursed. It was fenced off, the records sealed. Children were told not to go near it. Most obeyed. But sometimes, late in the fall, people say you can still smell it, lavender and copper, when the wind shifts just right. And once a year, on the night of the fire, the glassy patch reflects 3 shadows, even when no one is there. In the autumn of 1977, a woman named Helen Bradshaw gave birth to her first son in a quiet Kentucky town not far from where the McKinley farm once stood. The delivery was smooth, unremarkable. The boy was healthy, silent, watchful. He didn't cry for nearly an hour. When he finally did, the sound didn't carry right too sharp at the start, too low at the end, like something caught between a whisper and a growl. They named him Lucas, but by the time he turned 3, he refused to answer to it. He called himself Abram. At first, it was dismissed as a phase, a story he'd picked up, maybe from television or a book. But Helen swore he hadn't been exposed to either. The family didn't own a TV. He hadn't yet learned to read. More unsettling was the language. He spoke it fluently, a flowing, lyrical French that no one in the family recognized. Not Canadian French either. Older, stiffer, the kind you'd find in the margins of 18th century letters. He called the stove le feu de maison, referred to his sister as la petite sœur, and once corrected a local priest's pronunciation during Mass. By 5, he began asking questions that Helen couldn't answer, about soil quality near Red River, about barn architecture, about how silver tarnishes in humidity. He wouldn't eat meat. He wouldn't go near mirrors. He once scratched Solomon into the underside of his bed frame in perfect cursive. No one had taught him cursive. One night, Helen caught him outside near the woods behind their house, staring up at the moon. When she asked what he was doing, he said, "Waiting for the rest of me." At school, he struggled to make friends. Teachers noted his quiet nature, his tendency to draw strange symbols instead of words. He once handed in a paper covered in circles with tiny arrows looping in and out of each one. The teacher asked him what it meant. "It's how we used to find each other," he said. At 7, he began sleepwalking, always to the same place, the corner of the backyard, where the soil grew darker and damper, no matter the season. He'd stand there, barefoot, whispering numbers. Once, Helen followed and heard him say "toi," again and again. 3. The same year, an archivist from the State Historical Society came through town gathering oral histories. He met Helen by chance. When she told him about her son, the man went pale. He asked to see the boy. Abram greeted him in French and asked, "Did you bury the chairs?" The archivist left without saying goodbye. Helen never got an answer, but from that day on, she locked the doors at dusk and removed every mirror from the house. In early 2023, a small documentary team from Louisville arrived in Hollow Creek with cameras, drones, and a half-funded grant. They were young and eager, calling their series Buried Bloodlines, dedicated to uncovering unsolved genetic mysteries of the American frontier. Someone had tipped them off about a surviving heirloom from the McKinley property, a hairbrush found by a distant cousin locked away in a cedar box, supposedly belonging to one of the 3 brothers. The brush was peculiar, old wood, hand-carved, with initials that had half faded into the grain. The bristles weren't made of animal hair, as most were in the era. They were finer, glossier, almost like glass thread. But what made it valuable, the team hoped, were the strands still tangled in its base, pale, nearly white, but unmistakably human, or so they thought. They sent the brush to 2 independent labs, one in Virginia, the other in Chicago, requesting a standard mitochondrial DNA analysis. No flashy claims, just a quiet hope to trace the lineage of a story too strange to die. 2 weeks passed. Then came the calls. The first lab said the sample had contamination issues. When pressed, the technician admitted off record, it didn't behave like human tissue. The structure was wrong. I'd rather not be involved further. The second lab returned the brush with a formal letter, no results. It simply read, "We reserve the right to refuse any material deemed anomalous or potentially hazardous." This qualifies on both counts. One of the researchers on the team, a biologist fresh out of grad school, tried running a test himself. He borrowed access to a university lab, performed a basic spectrometry scan, and stopped midway through. According to his notes, the sample emitted a low-frequency vibration during heating. The scanner picked it up. He claimed it pulsed, alive. The footage from that test was never aired. Weeks later, the team abandoned the project. Their lead producer, a woman named Fiona, reportedly told her assistant, "Some stories don't want to be opened. This one bites." They boxed the brush back into its cedar case and mailed it to the local museum in Hollow Creek. The museum director never received it. The package tracking stopped 5 towns away, just vanished. By late 2023, the team's website shut down. Their social media went dark, and one of their trailers, the one that teased the Hollow Creek segment, was removed for violating platform guidelines. No one ever explained what those violations were. In Hollow Creek, the house that once stood near the Red River is gone now, scorched into memory. But the soil still feels different beneath the trees, softer, quieter, and some say, on certain nights, if you press your ear to the earth, you'll hear it breathing back. The cylinder sat on a shelf between a cracked phonograph needle tin and a rusted tobacco tin labeled Uncle Jesper's Blend. The antique shop itself was barely a shop, more a converted barn off Route 71, run by an old man who didn't know what half his inventory did. But the wax cylinder had a tag tied to it with twine, written in faded pencil, Red River, 1901. Don't play at night. It was a boy named Devin who found it, fresh out of college and bored on break. He bought the cylinder for $3 and brought it home, along with a working Edison phonograph from the same shelf. He liked old things, things with a hum. The first time he played it, nothing came out but static. Long, droning scratches and a distant tick, like a heartbeat slowed to stone. But as the needle ran closer to the center, the crackle smoothed and a voice emerged. It was male, but not quite. Too smooth, too distant, as if it wasn't spoken into a horn, but from inside the wax itself. It said, "We were never meant to stay." Then silence. Devon leaned closer. He thought that was it. A clipped recording, maybe a preacher's unfinished sermon. But then faintly, as if the machine had inhaled, "You invited us." He didn't move. You opened the soil, the room dropped 10 degrees. The next few seconds were unintelligible, not static, more like language spoken backward, layered and sped up. When slowed digitally later, it almost resembled names. Elijah, Solomon, Abram, but twisted. Then the final phrase, clear and cold. You cannot bury what remembers. Devon unplugged the machine. He sat for nearly an hour without moving. That night, he called the antique shop to ask about where the item came from. No one answered. The next morning, the barn was empty. No sign it had ever been a shop. No Uncle Jesper's Blend. Just collapsed beams and dust, and no record of a storefront license ever filed in that county. Devon uploaded the audio online, just once. The post was flagged and removed for unnatural modulation. A forum moderator messaged him privately and asked what tool he used to fake the voice. He didn't respond. 2 weeks later, he mailed the cylinder to a university archive in Virginia. They confirmed the wax was authentic, but the inscription on the base, which no one had noticed before, was not. It read, "McKinley, Hollow Creek, returned." And beneath that, etched by hand, in a script that didn't quite curve right, "It never ends. It listens." Comment which state you're watching from, and if you enjoyed the video, like it and subscribe for more stories like these that are untold.